What is going on, YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the third album by Rick Ross, and this project is called Deeper Than Rap, and it came out in the spring of 2009. Now, prior to this, Rick Ross was kind of more with like the Runners and Drumma Boy type productions, more kind of drug dealing, heavily rooted drug dealing type music like Hustlin' and Push It to the Limit and The Boss and some of those type records. But he really kind of switched his sound up on this particular project. And it was surprising just because this is a pretty baffling project, just because this is the sort of elegance that Biggie showed on Life After Death, which was kind of the same product when Biggie dropped Ready to Die. He was still kind of like a crack dealer, hustler type dude that was kind of from rags to riches and that sort of emphasis and just the product of it. But by Life After Death, he was a mafioso, glossy kind of individual. And that's kind of what Rick Ross does. This is not a mafioso album, but it has like a very sheened emphasis of sophistication. Like if you like the Maybach music song off of Rick Ross's Trilla album, it's basically just a ton of like songs like that on this particular project. And it just really is off the chain. I was surprised how easy and how quickly Rick Ross took to water with this particular project as far as being able to make these sophisticated tunes kind of work like the way it did. Because really, minus like one song, which is just the song Face, or maybe one or two songs, for the most part, Rick Ross kind of ditches the hustling and he definitely ditches like the 80s crack dealer type feel of like Miami Vice and that sort of era and aura. But then he also kind of ditches like the dirty South kind of Southern Fried type rap of Trilla also. So it's this kind of, there's not really records like Speedin' and Here I Am and The Boss with T-Pain and some of those records from like Trilla. So this is kind of a new valve for the most part on this project. And I just found it particularly interesting because the sophistication for Rick Ross works extremely well. And there's some other things to talk about, like the fact that Rick Ross was revealed that he might not have been the big, huge cocaine dealer that everyone thought he was on his earlier albums, because in 2008 he was revealed to just have been a correctional officer at one point. And then also he got into a beef with 50 Cent around this time. Right before this album dropped, he got into a beef with 50 Cent, and it was actually a pretty interesting beef. They dropped a number of disses, like Rick Ross dissed 50 Cent on Mafia music, and 50 Cent became Pimpin' Curly and had Lloyd Banks diss Rick Ross and that type of stuff. So there were some stuff that kind of went on with the promotional cycle of this. But ultimately, in terms of sales, this album really did not do as terrific. And it's kind of the same thing. Like what happened with 50 Cent in 2007, 2008 kind of happened with Rick Ross too. Now, he became revitalized in the early 2010s, but I think if Rick Ross would have continued on the trajectory that he kind of had with this album, at least in terms of sales, he might have dried up a little bit sooner than people would have wanted, just because the singles really did not do that outstanding on this project, nor did they really do that outstanding on Teflon Dawn until Rick Ross teamed up with Drake for the Aston Martin music song. So apart from that, that was really about the only thing. But this album, I do like the singles on here. There's a lot, like all three of them are sophisticated. There's not really any Hustlers anthem like this time. There's not really any Hustlers anthem this time around, and there's not really any drill music or bopping kind of Southern Fried Club music like The Boss or like Speedin' or something like that. But it's just kind of interesting. So we'll go ahead and get to the singles. And so there were four singles, one of which was a promotional single. I'll talk about Mafia Music last because that was the promotional single. But the first single was Magnificent. This is a particularly fabulous song. I really and thoroughly enjoy the production on this song. It just really has some pretty magnificent, to quote the song, magnificent kind of emphasis here. It's just glossy, mellow, and just overall has just like a sort of refinement that's just, it's not in your face and rough and rugged and that type of stuff. It's just a very smooth as butter kind of song. I just think that that's an interesting thing about it. It's just at this point in time, this was different than every single that Rick Ross had dropped. I mean, it wasn't like Speedin', wasn't like The Boss, wasn't like Here I Am, wasn't like Push It to the Limit, and it wasn't like that this crossed that line with Akon, and it wasn't like Hustlin', definitely. So just all the stuff that he had dropped. I mean, John Legend delivers a pretty like excellent hook overall. I just would have to say it's probably one of John Legend's best hooks in my opinion. I mean, he's done a lot of good ones, but this is a really excellent one. And it just is an overall, it's just like I said, it's just an overall smooth song, and it's just a different taste of Rick Ross that really showcases the sophistication like immediately. If you're looking for like a more rough and rugged Rick Ross, this is probably not the album for that. I just would have to say overall, but this is a very smooth song. The second single was All I Really Want, and this has The Dream. Now, this one is another song. This one is another. All I Really Want is definitely like a summery date night kind of song. It just has like that kind of feeling of just dates throughout the summer and that type of stuff. Just kind of real kind of hazy, summery kind of vibes about it. Just in the night, evening, the night sky and the evening sky and that type of stuff. This really has like a pretty paced, definitely has a pretty paced feel towards it. It's like the overall concept. It's not quite as catchy in production as Magnificent is or Maybach Music too, but this has a good emphasis. This really feels like an outdoor, kind of like something Sean Kingston would do, with just with a lot more emphasis. This is definitely a summer song, All I Really Want, but it just really kind of feels like at a luau or some sort of like backyard party in a more sophisticated sense. It's some place where there'd be like venues and runways and that type of stuff, just outdoors. There's places near Hawaii and Florida and Texas and some of those type places with more sophisticated sense. This is pretty good emphasis. The Dream does a great job. I need to start reviewing his music, but this is a real kind of buttery smooth hook on there also. The third single was Maybach Music 2, and this has Lil Wayne, Kanye West, and T-Pain on there also. This is really like a taste of 2008 somewhat. This has a real kind of jazz rap, kind of pretty smooth saxophone type tune on here. It's just really sophisticated, probably a little bit more sophisticated than the first Maybach Music, despite the fact that that was a really glossy one. This is a glitzy song. I kind of feel like the emphasis is a little bit over saccharine, but I do kind of feel like it is pretty good for what it is. I think probably the problem, I like the production on the song, but I just feel like the T-Pain hook, for some reason T-Pain just did not deliver the most excellent hook on here. I feel like it was decent, but I'd probably give T-Pain like an 83-84% in terms of the quality of the hook on here. It's just B minus kind of range. It's not like he was back in 2008 when he had like the Midas touch and that type of stuff. And it's kind of, I mean, it's too bad that T-Pain started to burn out in 2009 and 2010, because this was a song that probably could have kept him around longer. It is good, but like I said, it's just kind of in decent range more so than a super excellent and that type of stuff. But Lil Wayne has a pretty killer verse on here. Kanye has a surprisingly effective verse, and Rick Ross has some good stuff on here too. So they all do great. This is a lyrical song, and it's just very sophisticated and smooth. Like all three of the singles that are not promotional singles are very sophisticated. They just have a lot of gloss and kind of glamour to them that just has a different edge. This is just a different kind of vibe for Rick Ross overall. And the promotional single was Mafia Music. Now this was a diss to 50 Cent on here. It's not, the whole song isn't meant for dissing 50 Cent, but there's kind of a line towards the end of the song, or a couple lines towards the end of the song, where he disses 50 Cent and stuff. It's a very thumping and militant kind of song. I just like the overall concept behind it. It's just a very kind of bravado, and just overall it's an edgy song, and it just kind of is a good contrast with the rest of the album, where most of it's just sophisticated and kind of, if you look at the album cover where Rick Ross looks really refined on the album cover, it's just kind of in that sort of lifestyle, more kind of ritzy and glissy and glossy type songs. But this is actually one where Rick Ross is kind of back on his more street dealer type vibes, but just in a more rougher sense for like Mafia Music. But it just still kind of has some elegance towards it. I like this song. I mean, it doesn't have a chorus on here. It's just a straight street song the whole way through, but I do appreciate it. It's just pretty much like a standard, just bars after bars. Rick Ross just going in, talking about people that, just talking about all the haters and naysayers and that type stuff as far as that kind of goes. It's pretty solid. I mean, yeah, it is. So to talk about the rest of the songs, there's 14 songs on here, and I wound up liking 11 out of 14. So I'm going to go ahead and list those 11 songs for you. So those 11 songs would be Magnificent. Those 11 songs would be Magnificent, Usual Suspects, Maybach Music 2, Bossy Lady, Rich Off Cocaine, All I Really Want, Yacht Club, Murder Mommy, Mafia Music, Lay Back, and Face. Like I feel like Yacht Club is another summery tune. There are some summery songs on this album. I'm just gonna go ahead and point out some of these summery songs. So if you're looking for just like a nice summer good time, some real good clubbing and kind of beach music and just luau kind of music and just overall summer festivities, pool music, that sort of stuff. There is some good stuff here. Yacht Club, obviously, just by the album, by the song title, you can tell that sort of concept. Usual Suspects is really summery, but this is also kind of mall music. I definitely felt like Usual Suspects is kind of a boppy kind of mall tune on here, just really ritzy, but still kind of meant for like a shopping mall or just some place where you'd buy clothes and kind of shop and that type stuff. And it's nice to get Nas on this song. It's definitely nice to get a Nas song where he's not kind of on like these mostly lyrical and just kind of dull, kind of introspective songs. This is kind of more contemporary than I've heard Nas on for quite some time. So I do like these Rick Ross and Nas kind of pairings, but this is a nice one. I forgot that he was on this song. But yeah, Yacht Club is summer. Usual Suspects is summer. That has just a real kind of boppish, kind of beep and bloop type tune on there that just works pretty well. Definitely a hot song. This definitely feels like a scorcher, just a real hot summer day kind of song is Murder Mommy. This feels like a Miami Vice kind of 80s type tune. This really feels like when the boats are tearing up the oceans and that type stuff. Foxy Brown, who really doesn't make many appearances anymore these days, at least even in 2009 that she didn't make many appearances, but that's just kind of the concept is she's on this song. She does pretty well on here. This is a nice summery glitzy kind of tune, definitely a song for Bay and that type of stuff. It's kind of like Busta Rhymes is I Love My Bitch, where that one's just kind of a nice bop for your girlfriend and that type of stuff. Murder Mommy is definitely one of those. It's kind of in a more summer weather and hot weather, especially kind of tune. It's just meant for not just May or June, but like July and August, the hottest months of the year, at least in the northern hemisphere and that type of stuff. Lay Back is a nice jivey club track on here meant for the ladies. This is another ritzy one. This has a nice kind of paced kind of like it's kind of electronic, but it just kind of has like some synthy type stuff in here. I'm not really sure what that is, but this is a nice kind of club induced kind of bop. And Robin Thicke does a great job on here. This is another cat that doesn't get hit up for hooks very often, but he kind of made a pretty smooth vocals on here. Rick Ross got a lot of good hooks on this album. I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. Like there's Rick Ross got a lot of good hooks on here. There's folks like Avery Storm, The Dream, Robin Thicke, Neo, John Legend, T-Pain, Kevin Costner. There's just a lot of overall good ones, like 7 different ones out of how many on here. It's just really quality hooks. This is a pretty damn hooky album, and it just overall contributes to the emphasis behind it. But speaking of rich off cocaine, Avery Storm really delivers like a sophisticated kind of tune. This is one that's another one that's just very different from what Rick Ross was doing previously. This is another one that's just kind of smooth and just kind of more evening based, kind of when the day is done. And it just, you can tell by the chorus just that it's kind of meant for more after work, just kind of got the work done for the day, evening kind of relaxation, just kind of reflecting and kind of being glad and that type of stuff, just proud and that type moments. I definitely think it's a very sophisticated kind of tune. And Bossy Lady is a really effective one. This is probably one of the best songs on the album, in my opinion. This just has like such a watery and kind of floaty type beat on here. Just really kind of like just very splashy and just overall mellow in like a watery kind of way. It just has a good emphasis. Just a nice another nice summer tune, and Neo really does a great job on here. And this probably could have been a single. I would have almost said that Bossy Lady probably could have been a single. This is just an overall great album cut. These are just some moments. Like I feel like Usual Suspects, All I Really Want, Laid Back, Bossy Lady, Face in some cases, despite the fact that's more of a street cut, Magnificent. These are just some great kind of summery kind of bops on here that just kind of are meant for just like warm weather and being near pools and oceans and boats and that type stuff overall. It just has a lot of good emphasis that Rick Ross kind of nailed this, where I kind of feel like it's just more recreational oriented compared to like Port of Miami and Trilla. I mean, those were definitely good tunes also, but they still kind of had like the street and kind of more rough and rugged edge towards them. But this is a lot of recreational, not quite as defenses up and guards up kind of altitudes this time around. There are some cuts for that, but not as many this time. Like one such tune that takes me back to like the Trilla days of Rick Ross, and maybe even in some cases like the Port of Miami days, is Face. This is a Drumma Boy beat, and Drumma Boy is like hardly on this album. This is his only song on here, but this one just really felt ripped out of 2007 or 2008. But it's just a nice retro kind of Southern summer nightclub kind of song. This really has like a thumping, plodding kind of beat. This really sounds like something ripped out of 2007. Very similar to like Rocco's "I'ma Do Me" and some of those type tunes. And Trina, she does a good job on this song too. Yeah, Trina and Rick Ross do a good job on here. And I'm just trying to think of some other highlights off this album. I'd say that about takes care of it. That's about all of the highlights, and that's kind of the concept. To talk about some of the songs I didn't like most of the songs I didn't like are at the end. Gunplay, Valley of Death. There were three songs I didn't like, and those three songs were Gunplay, Valley of Death, and In Cold Blood. And those just kind of like Valley of Death and In Cold Blood had the worst beats on the album. Those were just trying to be like album cuts that just kind of retain some of Rick Ross's gangsta edge, but just didn't come off compelling, interesting, or very much captivating to make you want to tap into those. I feel like the new styles that Rick Ross conveyed on here just really made him soar a lot higher than he had done for the most part, despite the fact that his previous albums were pretty good too. But this new sheen, it just kind of felt like these songs that didn't have this new sheen were just kind of awkward. And really, Gunplay was a decent beat. I actually didn't dislike this beat on here, but it just didn't come off quite as interesting or as exceptional as it needed to. I feel like, I mean, it could have almost been like a decent album cut, but I think they probably should have given it a different kind of beat, because I feel like these kind of edgy street type tunes on here, Rick Ross still kind of retains some of that edge, but I think probably he should have put Gunplay on something that could have been something with a little bit more bop, because there's a lot of songs for the ladies on here, a lot of good summery tunes, but there's not really like anything with his homies. Like there's no real posse songs on here for the most part, minus Nas. Not many rappers actually drop verses on here. Gunplay and Nas are about the only other ones apart from Trina that really drop verses on this album. I guess Maybach Music too is another one. But I kind of feel like Gunplay probably could have been on like a dance tune or just something with a little bit more energy, because Gunplay is a pretty wild animal. He definitely is a crazy cat that probably could have been on a more song that could have showcased that energy rather than just the standard thug posturing and gunplay lyrics that were typical of such a cat whose name is Gunplay and that type of stuff. But this is kind of the thing. So, but yeah, I'm going to give this album a 10 out of 10. I definitely liked 11 out of 14 songs. It's pretty excellent. This is up there with Trilla. This is another highlight for Rick Ross, and this is pretty much one of his best albums. I just would have to say overall it's excellent. Really delivers on that front. These new tricks that Rick Ross delivered upon just are really effective and kind of showcase a new skill for Rick Ross that he would develop even further later with some of these glossy and sophisticated kind of tunes. And he took to the water pretty well as far as being able to kind of not just be like a standard street hustler and cocaine dealer like he was in his early days. That's kind of the awesome thing about it. And the social score, I'm going to give the social score a 9, just because there's a lot of good bops for the ladies and that type of stuff, and some good summer tunes, just overall some good summer moments. But this record really doesn't have like a club tune that much, minus like Lay Back and maybe Usual Suspects. There are not many dance club kind of tunes. Like I feel like Trilla did a better job of getting some of those songs like The Boss and Money Make Me Come and like This Is the Life and some of those type tunes, but there's really not an overabundance of dance club and night venue kind of tunes, and even strip club tunes. I mean, minus Face, that's about the only real one that does that. I think I talked about Face. Yeah, I talked about Face. That just is kind of the concept. It's just kind of short on like dance club and nightclub kind of bops, but I do feel like the overall glossiness has just got sophistication down, ladies tunes down, and summer tunes down, but it kind of nicks some things that it probably could have used. So I give it a 9 out of 10. That's still pretty damn solid. And in terms of the future, Rick Ross has been gone since 2021, but I'm thinking he's probably going to drop some more projects soon and that type of stuff. We'll see what happens with it. But this is definitely one to check out, but just understand that it just has a different valve. This is kind of more relationship Rick Ross and kind of more summary Rick Ross and just kind of more sophisticated Rick Ross. That's just kind of the concept. He just has some themes that are kind of more present on this release than previous ones. It's just kind of a different kind of aura this time around.